Hi, I'm Tara Singh Carlson, and I am the lucky woman who gets to edit Jill Santopolo. I am thrilled to introduce her today. Jill is one of those dream authors that every editor hopes she'll get to work with one day. She is an incredible, honest writer, but also a thoughtful, hardworking, empathetic, gracious person. Her adult debut novel, the New York Times bestseller, The Light We Lost, was published in May of last year and has resonated with people around the world. Its story of first love and difficult choices was selected as a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, has sold more than 200,000 copies in the U.S., and has been translated into more than 35 languages, becoming a bestseller in several. In addition to being a talented and New York Times bestselling author in her own right, she is also the associate publisher of Philomel Books, an imprint of Penguin Young Readers, where she has edited such wonderful books as the #1 New York Times bestsellers She Persisted by Chelsea Clinton and Girling Up by Mayim Bialik. She has also authored several series for children, even helping to turn one of them, the Sparkle Spa series, into a grade school musical. And for many years, she was also an adjunct professor at the New School. And yes, I have also felt lazy in comparison, but I have learned not to compare myself to Jill because she is simply one of a kind. I couldn't be more proud to introduce her now and to be publishing her second novel for adults, The Gloriously Moving More Than Words, in February of next year.
Thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Tara. I'm sorry I make you feel lazy. If it makes you feel any better, I'm super impressed by you and all of your books. And I'm so happy that you orchestrated it, that I could be in a room filled with librarians. One of my very favorite people when I was growing up was my elementary school librarian, Mrs. Morris, who introduced me to so many of my favorite books, the Boxcar Children's series, Bridge to Terabithia, Harriet the Spy. I've never forgotten her 5-finger test, where if you read a page of a book at random and don't know the meaning of 5 of the words on the page, you should save it for later when you're a little bit older. There are still some books I'm saving for when I'm a little bit older. Mrs. Morris recently sent me a friend request on Facebook after hearing that The Light We Lost had been published, and I seriously don't think I've been that excited about a friend request on Facebook since Meg Wolitzer agreed to be my Facebook friend after we met at a party a few years ago. Author perks, right? But it wasn't just my school librarian that I loved. I loved the librarians at my town's public library too. And every summer they would hold these reading contests where you got a card that kind of looked like a book-themed Candyland board and a sticker for each book that you read and brought back to the library if you told them what you thought of the story. There were about 50 spaces on the board, and you got a prize at various points in the book accumulation process. I can't remember what the prize levels exactly were, but I do remember that you could win 3 things: a pencil, a ruler, and an eraser. The first summer I really knew how to read, I got all 3. And as I was sitting and thinking about that library summer in preparation to write this talk, the prizes kind of struck me: a pencil, an eraser, and a ruler. They're objects that help you to record, to forget, and to measure. And I realized that books, both reading them and writing them, are those 3 tools for me. They're my pencil, my eraser, and my ruler. The first sketchings of More Than Words started in January of 2015. That was when my father died. And as our family, in shock and grieving, sat accepting condolences, one of my father's friends came up to me and said, "I have a feeling you're going to write about this one day." To be honest, I was livid. I thought it was insensitive. It made my father's death into grist, into fuel, into something useful or beneficial or even potentially beautiful, which it was not. To me and to my sisters and to my mother, it was absolutely not. So instead of writing about my father's death, I wrote a children's chapter book, Sparkle Spa #7, Bling It On. My editor offered me an extension that January. She said it was okay if I was late, but I threw myself into writing that book as if my own life depended on it. Writing was an eraser. It was a chance to disappear into a world I'd created, into other people's lives, other people's problems, and not have to think about my own. But while I was writing the Sparkle Spa series, I had also been slowly and surely working on my first book for adults, The Light We Lost. This is a book that I call emotionally autobiographical. Though the story, plot point by plot point, is not my story, and the main character, Lucy, is not me, many of the emotions she feels throughout that book in the wake of a heartbreaking breakup are emotions that I'd been feeling in the years I wrote that book. And it wasn't until my father died that I wrote the final chapters, the ones in which Lucy faces the death of someone very dear to her. That book, writing that book, it was my pencil. It was my chance to record, my way of putting what I experienced on paper. And as I wrote those final scenes, I thought, well, maybe my father's friend was right. Maybe everything I experience is grist, it is fuel. And if I can't make it beautiful, I at least can make it feel real. And I thought that perhaps that was all I would write about my father's death. But then I started working on a new book. I started writing the first fragile pages that would become more than words. And no matter what story I tried to tell, the main character's father always died. He was always dying. It wasn't something I purposefully sat down to write about, but the experience, those emotions, it was like they permeated my writer brain. I needed that pencil. I needed to record them because they'd become all I could record. I was pretty sure I wouldn't be able to write about anything else until I did. But it wasn't just his death I needed to record. I needed to record memories of him and what happened after he died, too. In More Than Words, Nina loses her beloved father, Joseph. Her mother died when she was young, so he's her only living parent, and a successful New York hotelier who wants his only child to inherit his corporation and carry on his legacy. This was not the case with my father. He was a dental surgeon. My mother is still alive. Just want to get that out there. But in More Than Words, after Joseph dies, Nina finds out secrets about her father that he'd been keeping from her for her whole life, including a letter that her mother wrote to him that changes Nina's ideas about her parents' relationship and the man her father was. After my dad died, we were left to that awful task of dealing with the physical items he left behind. Suits, shoes, t-shirts, socks, books, ties, so many ties. I was helping my mom sort through things one weekend, and she asked me if I could go through my father's bedside table. I said sure, because you don't say no to your mother in this circumstance. So I opened some drawers, and I found the second book in George R.R. Martin's The Song of Ice and Fire series, only about a quarter read. I found at least 4 pairs of reading glasses, some spare change, pens, a pad of paper, a small tube of hand lotion. And then I opened the doors to the tiny cabinet underneath that drawer and had to collect myself for a moment, because inside it was every single card my sisters, my mother, and I ever gave him. Birthday cards, Father's Day cards, holiday cards, letters from camp, they were all there. I sorted through them, trying to bundle them by theme, by chronology, by who sent them, looking for some order in the 40 years of correspondence. When I found a letter my mother had written my father after they'd had some sort of argument in the early 1990s. I don't know what it was about, because after I read the first 2 lines of the note, I folded it back up and stuck it in its envelope. Maybe it's a deplorable lack of curiosity in a writer that I didn't want to read it, but I didn't. And I brought the letter to my mother for her to do whatever she wanted with. And that was the moment that More Than Words became a more filled-in sketch in my mind. The what if. The what if I'd learned something about my father, about my parents, that I didn't want to know. So in More Than Words, Nina does. I was also falling in love as I wrote this book with the man I'm going to marry in June. And that was something else that filled in the sketch. I was volunteering on Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, so politics was part of it, and why people choose to work in that world added another layer of detail to my story. They were all emotions that I wanted to record, wanted to write down in my own way. And so is my identity. As some of you might know from my last name, my father's family is Italian Catholic, but my mother's family isn't. They're Eastern European Jewish, and growing up, I never felt quite fully anything. My fiancé, interestingly, has the same background I do, but flip-flopped. His father's family is Jewish and his mother's is Italian. And he said to me in a conversation we had early in our relationship that he feels differently about being a mixture of those 2 backgrounds than I do. He feels like he can belong in both spaces equally. And that conversation we had was an eye-opening one for me about identity. So Nina, in More Than Words, has one parent whose family is from Great Britain and another whose family is from Greece. And Raphael, one of her love interests in the story, has one parent whose family is from Cuba and the other whose family is from Ireland. And they talk about identity there, about family, about what it takes for something that's in your DNA to become part of who you are. All of this I wanted to record. And the reason I did, the reason I wanted to tell these stories, to write this emotional autobiography, is because of the response I'd gotten from readers for The Light We Lost. As I intimated earlier, that book was born out of a breakup, out of a first love that ended in disaster. And since I've written that book, I've gotten so many emails and Facebook messages and Twitter and Instagram DMs from women and a couple of men who tell me how much they were able to relate to Lucy and who their first loves were and how their lives were altered by them. A book group that I visited in New Jersey told me that they became closer friends because of their response to The Light We Lost. It made them open up to each other about their lives in their 20s before they married and moved to the suburbs and joined their book club. And that's what I hope for More Than Words, too. In fact, a friend of mine at Penguin Young Readers read an early copy of the book and told me how much it made her think about her father, who passed away about 15 years ago. And her email made me so happy because that's what I hope this book will do, what I hope all my books will do. Touch people in a way that makes them think of their own stories, of their own lives, and delve into their own emotions. The third item I'd gotten that summer, when I did all that reading for the library, was a ruler. And now I realize I've used books as my ruler to measure how I feel differently now than when I wrote them or read them, how my life has changed since then, and how I've changed because of them. I hope that all of you and the patrons of your libraries will connect with Nina's story in More Than Words, and that for you, this book will perhaps become an eraser, a chance to escape your own life, or perhaps a pencil in which you recognize a piece of your story, or maybe a ruler, showing you how far you've come since you felt a certain way. Thank you again for having me here today. I've loved getting the chance to talk to you and tell you a bit about my book and my process as a writer. In fact, I've loved it more than words.